So I'm in my driveway last week. And what was in my driveway? A huge blue motorhome, because that's what I like to keep in my driveway. And I'm working on it. I'm getting ready to go camping. And along comes my mailman. Now, I got to tell you, do you guys like your postal carrier? Do you have a cool one? Well, I have the coolest mailman in the world. Shout out to Jeff Walker, the most hyper mailman ever. So he comes by, he's talking with everybody on the street. He's super excited. He sees the motorhome and he goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, this is amazing. This is awesome. Oh, I wish I had one of these. Oh, you must love this thing. What's the biggest trip you've ever taken in it?" And of course, many of you know, we took a really big trip in this motorhome. So I tell him, "Oh yeah, I quit my job. Yeah, we just went for 8 months. We lived in this thing and just traveled around the West, going everywhere." This is a picture of us in, what is this, Lone Pine, California? Lone Pine, yeah. So we traveled around the West. He's like, "Oh man, that must have been so amazing." I'm like, "Yeah, it was pretty awesome. It was pretty awesome." Now, in a minute, I'm going to tell you a secret about that time, which I haven't told very many people. But first, leading up to that time when we went on this trip, we sought God as a family. Amber and I really wanted to know if I was going to quit my job. I wasn't liking the situation I was in. I felt it was very hard for me. I was asking God, can I move on to the next thing? Can we go do this trip and take a break for a while? We sought God very hard in that to know, we wanted to know, is this where God is leading? And to the best of my ability, I knew that the answer was yes. There have been different things that I'd read in the Bible, a verse of scripture that I'd seen on the wall of a building that just caught my attention all of a sudden. As I'd been in prayer many, many times, at one point Amber and I went away and spent 2 days just in silence and prayer, asking God, should we take this big step in our lives, sell everything, quit our job, leave Vancouver, which is where we had been living. It seemed like in prayer, God was saying, yes, I'm going to be with you, do this thing. We had gone and sought counsel from different people who we knew who were following after God, and we knew that they wouldn't just tell us what we wanted to hear. They said, yes, we think God's going to be with you. We think this is a good idea. So every way that I knew how, we had tried to figure out, is this the way that God is leading? And God had responded, yes, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to protect you. Okay? And, whenever anybody asked me about that time, just like with my buddy Jeff, the mailman, I always talk about how amazing it was. And a lot of it was really, really amazing. But here's a secret. During that whole 8 months, I was terrified. During that whole 8 months, I was terrified. Now, why was I terrified? Because I didn't know if I would be provided for. That makes no sense, right? It makes no sense. Okay, when I had a job and I was earning money, not very much money, I was a youth pastor. How much do you think I saved up during the 10 years I was a youth pastor? Psh, goose egg, that's what it was. During that time, who was really providing for me? God. Not my job, not my own strength. God was providing for me that whole time. He is in charge of everything. During the time when I was traveling around with my family just in a motorhome, who was providing for me? God. Why should I be afraid in one situation and not afraid in the other? Because it turns out that when I quit my job and I went off to experience the great freedom that I had asked God for, God showed me that I had been believing a lie. I had not actually been trusting God alone to provide for me. I had been trusting my paycheck and my job. And even though I knew in my mind, God is going to provide for me on this trip, I couldn't see how that provision was going to come. I had no income during that time, and God provided the entire time. But it was always different and random and from places I couldn't predict or expect and know that it was going to come. And so every time, one source of income would come, and it would start to run out, and I'd get scared, terrified. And then another random source would happen because God's in control of everything. But I couldn't trust him. It was like walking through fire. I like standing close to a fire that entire time. Shh, it's a secret. Don't tell anybody I was scared the whole time. If you ask me after this, it was only awesome, okay? It was an awesome time. We're in a series of messages right now called Build More Fires. We're talking about the fire of God. How can we allow God to build His fire at the center of our lives and who we are? So our first point in this series, we'll have the same 2 points for the whole series. The first 2 points will always be the same. The first one is this: build the fire. There are things that we need to do in order to allow God to build His fire and make it burn brighter in us. We've been talking about that each week, and today we'll talk about it again at the end of the message. How do we build the fire? What do we need to do? The second point is this: gather the people, because this is God's plan to save the world. Human fire, human passion and love and devotion cannot save. Only God can save, only His fire. And God's plan to save the world is that His fire would burn bright in individuals, and then in His people, the church as a whole. And as that fire burns bright, other people would be drawn to God by its heat, by its intensity, by its power. That's His plan. We build the fire, then we gather the people. Our key story for today is going to help us get at the difference between human fire, paying attention to the little fires that are all over the place, the little things that we might love or give our lives to, versus God's true fire, paying attention to the real God. We're going to get at that difference today. And the story we're going to use is again in Exodus, this time in Exodus 32, is the story of the Israelites when they made a golden calf. They were trying to worship God, but they did it the wrong way. They made a golden calf. So we're going to talk about that story, then we'll read it, then we'll try to understand it, because it's a little bit of a weird story. All right? Now, the background, we've been in Exodus the last couple of weeks, and next week we'll be jumping forward. We'll be in the New Testament next week. But we've talked about the Israelites. So they were slaves in the land of Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt for 400 years. And as they lived in Egypt, they were under a system of control. A system of control that started up with Pharaoh and all of these things that they believed about the gods. And at the bottom of that system of control, it was a way that Pharaoh could control the entire society. At the very bottom of that were the Hebrews, the Israelites. At the very bottom of that system of control. And they didn't like being at the bottom. They were mistreated. It was terrible. Lots of bad stuff. And so they made a fatal mistake. Now this mistake, it's a mistake maybe because they didn't know what they were getting into. But it turned out to be the best mistake they could ever have made, because it brought them closer to God. But they did not know what they were getting into when they did this. They asked God to set them free. They asked God to come and save them. They cried out to Him and said, "Please, come save us, come set us free." And I'm sure in their minds when they thought that, I'm not sure exactly what they pictured. Maybe they pictured just God would help them not be slaves anymore. They could be, higher up in Egyptian society. God would just get rid of the bad things in their lives. They did not know what was in store for them. They did not expect that God was going to do something unprecedented in human history. That God was going to grab a whole nation of over 1 million people and pull them out of the place where they're living and just make them wander around the wilderness for 40 years. I bet you they had no idea that was coming. And we talked about the previous 2 weeks how Moses was called at the burning bush. He went down, big power struggle between God and Pharaoh. God wins, because duh. And then the Israelites, he gives them this pillar of fire and cloud to lead them, so that we talked about last week how that was God's guidance for this nation and His protection for them. Just like God had promised to guide me and protect me when I was doing my little wandering around the West in my motorhome with my family, He promised to guide and protect these Israelites, and He gave them these big signs in order to do it. So now all these great things have happened. They've seen God at work. They've walked through the Red Sea on dry land with walls of water. They've seen God destroy Pharaoh's entire army. They've seen God provide for them over and over and over again. And now they end up at Mount Sinai. This is the place where Moses took them. They're at Mount Sinai. They're out in the wilderness. God comes down in blazing fire and smoke on the top of this mountain, scares everybody because God is really big and scary, actually. He is love. But we sometimes don't understand what that means, that He is love. He is a burning fire of love that consumes everything that is wrong and evil. And so He came down on that mountain in fire, and Moses went up. And imagine, here's the leader who led these people out of Egypt. Imagine you left everything that you knew, everything that your ancestors had ever known. You went to a place you knew nothing about. You're in the wilderness. You don't know where your next meal is going to come from. You don't know who might attack you. You don't even know directions or have a map of the place because maps haven't been invented yet. You don't know where you're going to go next. And then your leader says, hey, I'm going to go up on top of that mountain that's burning with fire, and I'm not sure when I'll be back. And how long did he stay up on that mountain? Anybody know? He stays up on that mountain for 40 days. How do you think these Israelites felt after about 7 days Moses is gone? The one guy who knows how to get them somewhere and can talk to God. They're terrified. They have, just like I did, they have every reason to believe God is going to provide and protect. Every reason to believe it. He's done it so far. But they are terrified. They don't trust Him. They don't trust God, the Lord. And they want what they had. They want some security, some normalcy. They want their lives to be predictable. They want their lives to be under their own control. And so here's what happened next. Let's read it in Exodus 32. We're not going to read the whole chapter. If you want to get more details on the story, this will just be some pieces of chapter 32. But Exodus chapter 32 is the story of the people of Israel making this golden calf. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, that's Moses' brother, and they said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. Make us some gods that we can understand, who we can see, who we feel comfortable with, who won't ask us to do crazy things. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Man, look at that mountain. He's probably dead. Who could live in that?" Then, up on the mountain, the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, Moses, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt." This is almost like, I hadn't noticed this until right this moment. This is almost like mom and dad. When the kids do something bad, and then dad's like, "Your children, these are God's people." He says, "Moses, your people, your people have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol, cast in the shape of a calf or a young bull. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people." Now, still God speaking to Moses, "Leave me alone, Moses, so that my anger may burn against them and I may destroy them." Here you see both God, the seriousness with which God takes idolatry, and we'll talk about that in a minute. How seriously He takes it. He is prepared. He thinks this is so bad what they've done. He's prepared to kill them all. You also see His love. Who says that? Why does He say this to Moses? "Moses, don't stop me now. I'm going to go kill these people now. Moses, don't stop me." So what does Moses do? Moses tries to stop him. Of course. Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "O Lord," he said, Why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people, now it's God's people again, did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. In this section, if you read the details, what Moses actually does is he says, God, if you wipe these people out, then wipe me out as well. He knows that he's got an eternal security with God. He's written in God's book that even after he dies, he will live on with God. And he says, if you want to wipe these people out, blot me out of the book. He's willing to give up his own life, his own eternal life, his own soul to save these people. Much like later we see Jesus dying to save the world. And this is why God relents. But now let's talk about the story and talk about idolatry for a minute, because this is a little hard for us to understand. Not too many of us these days in North America, in North American culture, are tempted to make something with our hands and then bow down and worship it. We're not very tempted to do that. So first, we need to understand why the Israelites were tempted to do that. Then we need to understand why God considers it so bad. A huge part of the Old Testament, in fact, maybe even the biggest theme in the Old Testament in terms of what should you not do, okay, is do not commit idolatry. Do not worship idols over and over and over again. This is a foundational sin in the ancient world. So why is it so important to God? And then we'll talk about, do we still do this? Because we don't do it the same way they did. But do we still do it? Okay? So first of all, what's going on with these Israelites when they make this idol? The first thing I'll say is this: they are not, in name, worshiping a different God. What they are doing is they've created something. Aaron has created this bull, and they're calling it Yahweh. They're calling it the Lord. This is the God that brought us up out of Egypt. So they are still giving lip service to this same God that Moses was worshiping. They are saying, I worship God, the one true God. And this is that one true God, this bull. Why did they make a bull? Because this is what they had done in Egypt. This is what they are used to. This is very much like when I was in my wandering, this is very much like my desire for a job. Why would I want to have a job during that time when God had given me this space to be free, to seek Him, and He was providing for me? Because it was the safe, secure thing that I was used to. It was my myth, the thing that I believed was giving me control over my life. And that's what this bull represented to the Israelites. Down in Egypt, they had a god, one of the Egyptian gods. It was called Apis, and it was a bull. A young bull, and it would obviously grow older. It was an actual bull. They had statues of it too, but it was an actual bull. Whenever it died, there were all these elaborate ceremonies and rituals to figure out, find the bull reincarnated or the new one with the right markings and the right time of its birth. And they would get guidance and protection by the priests paying attention to what this bull was doing. So, if the bull eats certain food or doesn't eat certain food, that means something. If it sleeps over there instead of over here, this is how the people are guided, right? Now, to us, very clearly, which it wasn't to them, to us, it's all made up. But it gave them a sense of control over their lives. This is why all of our ancestors were so prone to idolatry, so tempted in that direction. All over the world, every culture participated in idol worship because life is scary. And we need to come up with something to say that we have control over this life, even if it's a lie, even if it's completely made up. So that's what the Israelites are doing. They're saying that they're worshiping the Lord, but they're bowing down to something that their own hands have made. That's what's happening. Now, why is it so bad? Why does God make such a big deal of this? In fact, you can see that worshiping idols Not worshiping idols is so important to God. It's more important than keeping these people that he loves alive. Now, confusion about this has sometimes caused people to say, well, like, God's not loving in the Old Testament. Like, look, he's about to wipe these people out. Well, I've pointed out to you as we've read it that he is full of love for these people. What's going on is that God sees what's really happening when they worship this golden calf, this bull. God sees what is really happening. We're going to turn to Psalm 115. We're going to read it, and this psalm is going to tell us why idolatry is so bad and what happens when people worship idols. Here we go. Why do the nations say, "Where is their God?" So this is later for the people of Israel. They are, at least at this stage, not worshiping idols. They are worshiping the one true God, and they can't make pictures of him or statues to bow down to. So all the other nations make fun of them. You can't even see your gods. They're invisible. Well, yeah, because God is invisible. Your gods are made up. Our God is in heaven. He does whatever he pleases, whatever pleases him. This is the scary, dangerous thing about the real God. We can't control him. He does whatever pleases him. But their idols are silver and gold made by the hands of men. They have mouths, but they cannot speak. Eyes, but they cannot see. They have ears, but they cannot hear. They have noses, but they cannot smell. They have hands, but they cannot feel. Do you get the point yet? Feet, but they cannot walk, nor can they utter a sound with their throats. Now here's the point. Here's the key verse. Those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. So idolatry, here's what it is. It's when human beings create something, then they pretend that that thing is God. It's the thing that can save them, provide for them, guide them, and they worship it. That's what idolatry is. And here's the problem with that. Whatever we worship, whatever is the thing that we give our life to at that deepest place, we become more and more like it. And idolatry is worshiping a lie. It's worshiping something that is not true. It's something that has no power, but we pretend it does. We pretend it does so that we can feel good and have a sense of control over our lives and not have to deal with the real God who is scary and asks very hard things of us. But when we do, we become more like a lie. In the deepest place, that is in our souls. So here we see exactly why God is so worked up about idolatry. It's worse than murder. When murder happens, a person kills another, destroys another person's body. In idolatry, a person destroys their own soul. And so you can see from God's perspective, this is no joke. This is no joke. Not only that, idolatry, because it is a fire, it is a human fire. It's something we've made that we get all passionate about, give our worship to, we're into it. When a fire is built, it draws people to it. That's what happened in that Israelite camp. When they started worshiping the golden calf, everybody went out of control. They came and worshiped it and did all kinds of bad things in the worship of it. It draws other people, and so idolatry actually destroys others as well, not only yourself. This is why God takes it so incredibly seriously. Now, that's all great. Let's not worship idols anymore. Who's with me? Let's not worship idols. Yes, woo! But we don't do that anymore, right? I mean, literally the physical way that they did in the ancient world, every culture, most of us have never been tempted to do that. I've never made a calf or something and decided to bow down and worship it. So physically, we do not create things and then bow down and sacrifice to them and worship them. Not in a very clear way, the way that the Israelites in the ancient world did. But you know, most of you, on the inside, deep down, we are creating idols all the time. Most of the idols that we have, some Christian leaders in the past have said that the human heart is like an idol factory. It's a factory producing idols constantly. We're constantly coming up with thoughts and ideas and ways of being that we want to give ourselves to so that we can feel in control of our lives or feel better instead of dealing with the real God who is scary. That's what was really going on with me and having a job. I didn't know it in the moment. I was blind to it. But I said, I worship God, I trust God. Every week I was saying, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. But it was clear as soon as I didn't have that job, I didn't really trust God. To some degree, that job and that paycheck had become an idol in my life, and I didn't even know it. This is exactly what the Israelites did with the calf. If you'd have asked any of them, why are you not worshiping the Lord? We are worshiping the Lord. That's the Lord right there, that calf. They thought they were worshiping the real God, but they had subtly substituted something easier for him. This is the danger of idolatry. When I was in university, just before I became a follower of Jesus, I was on a deep search for the meaning of life. And I decided to search by doing a bunch of philosophy. Do I have any philosophy nerds, geeks, awesome philosophy people in the house? I have a degree in philosophy, and so I was really, really into it because I thought, okay, we can think, we can use our brains, and we can figure out what life really is and what it's about. And the further I got into it, the more depressed I got. But that's not my story for today. My story is one day I was talking to one of my professors who I was very close to. He's a professor of philosophy at the university that I was at, and I was sharing this with him. The more I do philosophy, the more depressed I get because I realize I know even less than I thought. And I have no way of knowing what life is really about or where true meaning can be found. I have no way. I'm lost. And he said to me, first he said this. He said two things. The first thing surprised me. The second thing broke my life. The first thing was this. He said, oh, that's normal. Everybody who studies philosophy, like if you go on to get your doctorate, everyone's depressed for a long period of time. What? Okay, so that surprised me, but the second thing he said broke my life. He said, here's how you fix it. As we go along, us philosophers, eventually you just have to pick something. Just pick a philosophy, one that appeals to you in some way, and believe that it's true. And then base your life on that, because there's no certainty in this life. And it broke my life because I think God's Spirit was working in me in that moment, because what he was suggesting I do is exactly idolatry. He was suggesting I just pick something out of the air to believe so that I can feel good and get through this life. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a moment like that. That was a stark moment for me. And maybe for most people, there's never that much clarity that they are actually worshiping an idol. But we human beings do this all the time. What are the things in your life that you are really trusting in, that if they were taken away, you would not be okay? You'd be scared out of your mind. You say, I'm trusting God, I'm trusting Jesus, I've given him my life, but then this thing gets taken away and your life collapses. What was your life built on? It was built on a lie. God was always the one providing for me. And when he took me on that tour through the desert and through the West, he helped break down the lie that I was worshiping. He helped me come to terms and deal with the real God. So our final 2 points for today are these. Don't worship at your own fire. Resist the temptation. Resist the temptation to just pick something, whatever it is in your life. Try to see what those things are. Ask God and other people you can trust to help you see what they are. Turn away, at least for some period of time, from the things, even good things that you're called to look and search for God so that you are not constantly only looking at your own fire in your life. It is scary, it is dangerous, but it is the only thing that can shape us into the kind of people that God created us to be. And the last point is this: dare to worship the real God. When you are worshiping here at church, we call that worshiping sometimes when we are, praising God, singing out a song. We're going to do that again in a minute. Worship can be anything in your life, but this could also not be worship. It depends on what's going on inside of you. Dare to really reach out to the true God. Try to connect with Him and be open to anything He might do in your life. That's what it takes to allow Him to build the fire in you. It's also one of the scariest things you can do. We sang in that song just before this, we sang, God, we need your discipline. Are you really willing? Are you brave enough to pray that prayer? To say to God, I want you to be the only fire at the core of my life. And I'm willing for you to do anything it takes to get me there. If you've got the guts to do it, pray with me now. Our Father